welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for joining us on our new time, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you guys so much for watching. All right. So, ever since the pandemic, I think many people are more and more concerned about informed consent to our medical treatments. So, many people don't want to be forced into taking medicines or treatments or vaccines. Well, there's one medication that you might be taking without knowing, and it's because the government decided it was in your best interest. That is fluoride, which is said to prevent tooth decay, and it's very possible that it's being added to your drinking water. Now, there's no other reason to add it. It doesn't treat water in any way. It's just there so you don't get cavities. Well, a group is now challenging this, and we're going to be speaking today to Michael Connett. Michael is the lead attorney in the groundbreaking lawsuit against the EPA that seeks to ban the addition of fluoridation chemicals to drinking water. Why? Well, besides the fact that we don't want to be taking medicines without our consent, the studies show, even studies conducted by the National Institutes of Health, that added fluoride can cause neurodevelopmental disorders in children, amongst many other health issues. Now, the case goes to trial tomorrow, and we're going to find out what exactly those health issues are and the people and industries behind the push to continue adding medication to our drinking water. Now, before we get to our discussion, let's get to our sponsors. First of all, Field of Greens. I know you guys know I love this stuff. It really is a good tasting drink. I know a lot of people are worried about green drinks. You know, you've got to get all your fruits and vegetables into your diet. You know, you need to be doing that, but sometimes it's difficult to do because we're busy and we're eating junk food out of vending machines or whatever. But Field of Greens makes it easy for you to get all of your fruits and vegetables in an easy mix. It's a very fine powder made from organic fruits and vegetables that are carefully selected to make sure you get all of the best nutrients that you need. And it doesn't taste bad. It's a green drink that actually tastes really good. A lot of times these things are gloopy and you're like, I have to choke this stuff down. But this stuff is actually really good. And it's got a consistency of like a tea. So it's light, it's refreshing. I really like the lemon lime flavor. It really is refreshing. Tastes like green tea with lemon and iced green tea with lemon. I do notice a big difference when I have it versus days that I don't. And it really does give you the boost that you need. Your energy levels, you'll sleep better. You're going to lose weight when you're getting all those nutrients in your diet because you're not going to be craving junk food from those vending machines. So they have a bunch of other flavors. You can try out the mixed berry. You could try out the energy version. That's going to give you a little boost if you are, getting out there and working out, which we should also be doing. They also have a natural flavor, which I actually found tastes really good mixed in chocolate protein shakes. Okay, if you don't want the protein shake because you're still just put it in a chocolate milkshake and at least you'll have some nutrients. And it kind of gives an added berry flavor to it. It doesn't, surprisingly, it kind of just gave it a berry flavor to my chocolate shake. So a lot of different ways that you can use this stuff. But what is great is you're getting all of your fruits and veggies into your diet very easily and in a way that tastes great. And it's just high quality and you really will feel a difference when you consume Field of Greens every day. You just really, I genuinely notice a difference. So head to fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code Kim, and you're going to get 15% off of your first order. Again, that is fieldofgreens.com, promo code Kim to get 15% off your first order. I also want to introduce you guys to the Wellness Company and specifically their medical emergency kit. So the Wellness Company is a company that was founded by doctors like Dr. Peter McCullough, who during the pandemic was one of the staunchest voices about just really defending truth and science. And Dr. Peter McCullough started the Wellness Company to kind of combat the healthcare system that's out there and the difficulties people have, and people they don't trust it as much. We see a lot of studies saying that over 40% of Americans say that they would avoid doctors and hospitals unless it was some catastrophic situation. Well, the Wellness Company has this great thing called a medical emergency kit, and it comes with 8 potentially life-saving medications for you to keep on hand in times of need. So you don't have to go off to the doctor and get things. You will have them on hand right next to your, first aid kit. And these things are going to include medications for natural disasters or supply chain shortages. You won't have to deal with these types of things. who knows if the next pandemic's going to hit, knock on wood, let's hope it doesn't. But you can rest easy knowing that you have emergency antibiotics on hand, antivirals, antiparasitics, all of these things to keep you and your family safe. And what's really great is they tell you when and how you take these things. So you don't have to worry about, oh no, I don't know anything about this. Well, they've got you covered. It includes a guidebook. Their kit includes the guidebook and the dosing for each of the medications and when you would take it. So this is a great thing to have on hand to be prepared. I wish that something like this existed at the beginning of the pandemic. I loaded up on, I did a lot of research. I found what studies were showing, ended up having to load up my medicine cabinet one way or another. And it was not exactly easy sometimes to get the stuff that I needed. And this medical emergency kit is going to make it easier for you. So you could just have it on hand and you never know when you need things. But just go to twc.health/Kim and use the code Kim, and you're going to save 15% off at checkout. That's twc.health/Kim, code Kim for 15% off. But stay prepared, get that kit, keep it on hand. You never know. And, hopefully you never need it, but it will be there when you do. And there's a good chance that at some point you're probably going to need something that's in that kit, if not all the things that are in that kit. So check that out. The links are down below. All right, let's get on with our conversation today. The medication that they're slipping into our water without our consent much of the time. Michael Connett, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim. It's great to be here.
Okay, so we're going to start off from the beginning with this. I think many of us know that the powers that be have been fluoridating water for a long time in order to prevent us from getting cavities. That's what we've been told since we were young. So I want to kind of start from the beginning, kind of lay out the groundwork here. You guys go into trial tomorrow. This is when it starts, right?
That's right.
I want to get into what that court case is about specifically, what your aim is. But I want to start just from the beginning, the basics, lay the groundwork here. So when did we kind of go with the when, the why, the who, like the basics?
Right.
When did the powers that be start fluoridating our water?
1945 here in the United States.
Here in the United States. So was this happening anywhere else?
No, water fluoridation is very much a United States-born program. It started here in 1945.
So in 1945, they were like, I mean, this is just such a bizarre notion to me that people would think, hey, I got an idea. Let's add things to water. I mean, water is water. It's supposed to be pure, clean, fresh. We have to drink it. Everybody needs water. I would just think that they would leave it alone. So what in the world why did they decide, hey, let's add something to the water?
Well, I mean, to be fair, we do need to add certain chemicals to the water, like chlorine, because we need to kill some of the bacteria in the water that if you don't kill, you're going to get sick by drinking the water. So I think there's certainly a good argument to be adding chemicals to the water.
Okay.
But what makes fluoride unique is it's the only chemical that we add to drinking water that doesn't treat the water. Doesn't make the water safer to drink. It doesn't keep you from getting sick by drinking the water. Instead, it's the only chemical that's added for a medical purpose to reduce tooth decay, or that's the goal. But there's no other chemical that we add to public water for a medical purpose.
What? Okay. It's such an odd thing to even want to add to water for that reason. I mean, it's one thing if so I get it. You want to add things to the water to make sure it's safe for drinking, for consumption for people, so they're not going to get sick with bacteria and whatever. I can understand that premise, I suppose, treating the water. But to add a fluoride in 1945, and they got this bright idea, and they're like, oh, let's prevent tooth decay of all things. It seems like you'd want to maybe add, let's say, calcium to the water in order to prevent bone loss, which is seems to me like a bigger issue than tooth decay. We're going to prevent little kids from having cavities. Just seems like an odd thing to target, and then to say we're going to just put this chemical in all of what is fluoride? Is it a chemical? Is it what would you classify it as?
It is a chemical. It is okay. The ionic form of the element fluorine.
Okay. So for them to think, okay, we're going to add this chemical to the water for this one purpose. I mean, was there a big epidemic of tooth decay? Was this killing people? What was their reasoning?
Well, the reasoning is very interesting. There's a very interesting history when it comes to the early days of water fluoridation, and happy to go into some of that
Yeah.
with you. But to be fair for the proponents of water fluoridation at that time, we did have a real nationwide epidemic of tooth decay. Cavities were a big problem back then. Okay, they've become much less so a problem today, but they were a pretty big health problem in the United States, as in other industrialized countries. But going to your point about adding this chemical to the water doesn't treat the water. Why fluoride? Why not other chemicals? One important point here is that Europe, Western Europe, which is, generally far more progressive than the United States when it comes to healthcare policy, Europe, for the overwhelming part, has rejected adding fluoride to the water. They considered it, they looked into it, but they said no. And one of the main reasons why Europe did not follow the US is because of this medical ethics issue. Europe said, you don't add a medicine to the water because it takes away the individual's right to make their own health decisions, informed consent. And Europe, as in the United States, certainly has plenty of fluoride products on the shelves, like toothpaste that anyone can go to the pharmacy or the grocery store and buy. No one's going to prevent you from doing that in Europe, just as here in the United States. But Europe's position is, don't add it to the water. Get it in toothpaste, not in the water.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I mean, it does. It is actually. I mean, that's a really great point that it is taking away our decision, our choice on whether or not we want to prevent tooth decay. And it seems like they would get. I mean, why not just get to the root of why there's tooth decay rather than saying, "Oh, fluoride is going to prevent this." Well, what's causing the tooth decay to begin with, and can we educate the population and say, "Don't do X, Y, Z," or brush your teeth more, or stop eating so much sugar, or whatever is causing all this tooth decay? Target that, have a campaign that targets that rather than putting something in our water. They
Well,
didn't choose to do that.
that's a very good point, and it does sort of speak to some of the early politics on fluoride. Because if you look at who was involved, sort of some of the special interests involved,
Mhm.
one of them was the sugar industry. Because the sugar industry was very keen to find some other way of tackling the tooth decay problem than cutting down on sugar. So, if you go back into the historic documents, you'll see that the sugar industry was funding a lot of the research on fluoride. They saw fluoride as their pathway forward to keep their business good, and and to find a so-called solution to the problem. Another
Mhm.
interesting backer and supporter of fluoridation in the early days is the organized dentistry profession, the American Dental Association. Because back in the 1940s, as with the American Medical Association, the ADA was completely petrified that the government would socialize dentistry, would have government dental care to treat this massive problem of tooth decay. And
Mhm.
fluoridation provided a really nice, like, hey, don't cut into our monopoly, add this industrial chemical to the water, and then you'll do something about the problem, but don't cut into our profits. So you have a number of special interest groups back in the early days of fluoride.
Yeah. I mean, before we get into the actual problems with fluoride that it causes people, I know we're going to dive into that a little bit, but just the ethics of this. I mean, you brought this up that they decided to add fluoride in order to treat a medical issue. Let's say fluoride is completely safe, and we're going to talk about whether or not it is, but let's say it is completely safe and it's totally harmless and it's fine, and the only thing it really does is actually prevent tooth decay, and it's all as well. But still, the ethics of that, the informed consent that the Europeans said this isn't right, we can't do that to people. I mean, what stops them from saying, well, actually, we want to add vaccines to the water because we believe that vaccines are going to be helping people prevent illnesses. And it just seems like they could do with this precedent that's been set. They could do a lot more. I mean, have they attempted to do other things to our water to prevent other types of diseases or ailments?
Well, it does speak to the uniqueness of fluoridation that they have not yet attempted any other such medication through water. although there are periodic sort of proposals, I think one proposal was to consider, what was it? Sure, it's a chemical related to depression or anxiety that they
Oh
thought.
my gosh, you're kidding me. They were going to put something in there to make us happy?
Yeah,
Like
there was
happy water.
I mean, only from an academic standpoint. I mean, in the
Uh-huh.
academic literature, there has been some discussions of other possible medical treatments through the water supply. But as if you discard the principle, if you don't hold a bright line, then yes, it could lead to an encroachment from other medicines.
Yeah. Well, and that to me would be the biggest fear of all is that they would try to say, well, we've been doing this with fluoride for 75 years now. So why not do what, especially now as things have seem to have shifted with, like with COVID. I mean, just the pandemic, I feel like really opened up a lot of doors of people getting bright ideas, and they might get the idea of, let's just add vaccines to. I mean, that would be my concern, that they would feel like this is for the benefit of everybody. We must do this. Kind of like the ideas that they were thinking about. Oh, what if we use mosquitoes to vaccinate people or something?
Yeah.
Using something in nature in order to, or aerosol sprays or whatever. I mean, these things do take away our individual option to have certain medical treatment. So that to me would be the biggest fear. Is there anything, I mean, we're going to get into the case, but is there anything that prevents them from doing this to us, to adding things? I mean, if they're adding fluoride, it seems like they would be able to legally add other things if they can make the argument that it was for our benefit.
I mean, potentially. I mean, they haven't yet done so. So to a certain extent, history suggests that there's not that much appetite to do that, at least not yet.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Yet.
Yeah, right. But I think one thing, if you look at how the decision to fluoridate is made, it's not federal, it's state and local. So whether that would change in the future possibly and become a federal, I don't think you'll see it on a federal level. So I think these decisions will always be made on the local level.
Yeah, but you got people like me living in Los Angeles. This is where they would do something. It's communities like mine that during the pandemic really showed themselves to be very aggressive about passports and mandates, that it seems like they would maybe be the first ones to be open to other types of just, and not just with the water, but just with anything. And it seems like if the precedent is there to put things into our water, like why not put things into the air? Why not? It just seems like that precedent would be there. But let's get into the okay. So they get this bright idea. They're thinking, okay, we got a tooth decay problem. Let's add fluoride. Have you been able to trace? So you said that the sugar industry was very much pushing for this, but it just still seems so odd that they would go along with it, that the governments would go along with it. Was there anything else that was really pushing them into this?
Well, I've called the early days of fluoridation a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm of various special interests. We've already talked about the sugar industry. We've talked about organized dentistry. But you also have big manufacturing industries like the aluminum industry and like the steel industry, chemical industry, that was using a very large amount of fluoride in the 30s and 40s and 50s and on, and had a lot of fluoride liability problems for poisoning workers, poisoning the environment, poisoning downstream communities, and whatnot. And if you look at the historic documents, you will see that these industries paid a lot of money to research fluoride. And that research really was extremely influential in informing the public's understanding of this compound. In the 1930s, before there was a push to fluoridate, there was a real growing concern in the scientific community about the toxicity of fluoride and of the need to reduce our consumption of fluoride. And then after you see this industry sort of push into the scientific research, you see a sort of paradigm shift where the focus went not on toxicity anymore, but on benefits. And fluoride became this completely innocuous, benign substance like calcium that is perfectly safe, right? So you have to consider the role of the largest industries in this country. We're not talking small companies. We're talking Alcoa. We're talking U.S. Steel. We're talking Reynolds. We're talking the big sort of the industries that made the bombs to go to war in Europe. But there is one other factor, and this speaks in part to the government's interest back then. And that is that the government needed a very large amount of fluoride to build the atomic bomb, because you needed fluoride and uranium. And those are the two main basic toxic chemicals that were used to build the bomb in the early 1940s. And there is a lot of documents that have come to light and have been declassified over the past 30 or so years, which sort of show that the toxicologist, the chief medical director at the Manhattan Project, were very concerned about fluoride. We're doing experiments to see what fluoride would do to human health. And, but basically the long story short is the US government had a liability problem with fluoride, just like the fluoride polluting industries. And it created a climate which was not conducive to open, honest, transparent communications about the safety of this chemical, which contributed to this sort of like this airbrushed history and superficial understanding as to what this chemical can do to human health. Now, that doesn't explain exactly why we started adding this chemical to water, but it does. That context helps to explain why our understanding of fluoride became so distorted, because there were so many interest groups that that did not want fluoride to be harmful.
Right. Okay. So now let's get into the harms of it. I mean, obviously you've got a trial tomorrow. What is your lawsuit about?
Our lawsuit is, we filed it against the Environmental Protection Agency, the US EPA, under a law called Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA. TSCA gives EPA the authority to ban the particular use of a chemical that causes unreasonable risk to human health. And so we brought this lawsuit on the grounds that the current science, recent science on fluoride and the brain is very concerning, very troubling, and certainly there is every reason to believe that adding fluoride to the water creates a risk of various neurodevelopmental disorders in children. And that's what the lawsuit is about.
Wow, okay. Well, let's start off with which areas are still fluoridating the water in the United States?
In the United States, we still, about 200 million people still have tap water that is fluoridated. And pretty much the vast majority of large cities, you live in Los Angeles, that's fluoridated. The largest city in the United States that does not add fluoride to its water is Portland, Oregon. And in 2013, Portland had a referendum as to whether they were going to add fluoride or not. And they voted, no, we don't want to fluoridate. But you name it, you pick any large city in this country, and the odds are very, very high that they still add fluoride to the water.
Back in 1945, when they started doing this, you said that this was not a federal decision. This was on a local level, states and localities, municipalities. So did everybody do it? Were there areas that said, no, we're not going to do it? And did they give a reason why?
Absolutely. I mean, the one overwhelming pattern in the history of fluoride, especially from the 40s through today, you give citizens, the right to choose whether to add fluoride to their water or not. And I think it's about 2/3 of referendums on fluoridation have rejected it. So when people are given the choice, most of the times they say, no, don't add fluoride to our water. So where you have fluoridation historically, the decisions were made by city councils, county health boards, and in a number of states here in the US, you have state mandates. Like in California, there's a state law that mandates that every municipality with about 10,000 or more hookups must fluoridate. And a lot of other states like Connecticut, Arkansas, Georgia, Illinois, there's a number of states with state mandates. So in those states, you have no ability to control that decision at the local level. You have to change the state law. But there are a lot of states in the US where it does remain a local decision. And, in the past, 10 years, you probably have a couple hundred communities that have decided not to fluoridate.
But that's only in the last 10 years. What about in 1945 when they started rolling this out?
When they started rolling it out, it was even less popular back then. Actually, it's become referendums are more successful today in getting fluoridation than back in the 40s and 50s. And I think you see just sort of the accumulation of sort of the public narratives on fluoride have had a significant effect on public understanding. But nevertheless, today with referendums, I would say about 50% of the time, communities will vote down a proposal to fluoridate.
Okay. I'm just trying to get an idea of what percentage of the country was fluoridated in 1945.
Oh,
And yeah, so like, what would you say that was back then?
In 1945, there were
When they
only,
rolled it out, yeah.
they did two experiments, one in Newburgh, New York, and the other in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it was only two cities, and those were experiments. So they didn't start actually fluoridating for non-experimental purposes until the 1950s.
Okay. And then, so first of all, just to that, those poor two communities that got experimented on, did those people have a say at all?
I don't believe so. I believe that was a health board decision made by someone. No, it wasn't a referendum. It was not a referendum by those communities.
Okay. So then by the 50s, when they really started pumping out more fluoride into the communities, what percentage of the country would you say was fluoridated?
Very small. I mean, you had cities like Pittsburgh that started fluoridating in the early 1950s. I mean, fluoridation really started to take off between like the early 50s and the late 60s. That's when you see a large bulk of the country start to fluoridate. And so, yeah, I would say that's where you see the major expansion.
And then in the 60s, let's say in the 70s, what percentage of the country had fluoridated water?
In the 70s, I think it was about 50 plus percent, thereabouts.
Okay. So there's a good chance that a lot of people never were fluoridated. If they grew up in certain areas, they just never got it.
Certainly. Absolutely.
Okay. And then in the 80s and 90s, what would you say? Did the percentage grow? So if it was like 50% in the 70s, did it just increase and increase?
It has increased. And so today we are at about 70% of the population drinks fluoridated water. I mean, there's two ways of breaking it down. It's the percentage of the population that drinks public water, and that's over 70%. And then there's the percentage of the population as a whole, and I think that's a tad less than 70%, but right around 70%.
So 70% of the country is drinking fluoridated water today.
Every day.
Okay. So what's interesting about that is, so then you have some communities that have been fluoridating since the beginning of time, since 1945. And then you have some communities that kind of got on board. When would you say the last push to jump on board was? I mean, are communities still jumping on board now and saying, oh, now we're going to start fluoridating water? Or is this something that, they would have made the decision 20 years ago or something?
The promotion never stops. I mean, it's a pretty aggressive promotion of fluoridation that still continues to this day.
Okay. So then there must have been studies done, and we must know some of the effects. And you say brain, neurological, what kinds of effects and at what point, how long does it take before this pops up? Like if you've been fluoridated since you were in the womb, at what point do you start seeing these effects?
Well, there has been a lot of focus in the past 10 or so years on fluoride's potential to affect the brain. It was first studied, the fluoride in the brain was really started to come to light in the early 90s in China, actually. In China, they have fluoride pollution, naturally occurring fluoride pollution in some water. As they dig deeper down with their wells, they get fluoride from deep in the earth. And they started to notice in the early 1990s that the IQs of children in China who drank elevated fluoride were lower. And that was, they found they had these studies were not super, they weren't gold standard studies, but they were simple, elegant studies comparing one community with low fluoride and another community with high fluoride. And sure enough, they were finding that the elevated fluoride was associated with reduced IQ. And then that sort of prompted a lot of animal research to look at what fluoride does to the brain under controlled laboratory conditions. And those studies repeatedly and consistently show that fluoride does interfere with the brain, causes various changes in the brain, including deficits in learning and memory. There have been a lot of studies in rats and mice where they exposed them to fluoride, elevated fluoride, and put them through the mazes and find deficits in the ability to learn or remember. So you have those studies, but then what really sort of has been a game changer with fluoride is the National Institutes of Health, NIH, funded birth cohort studies, okay, in Canada and Mexico. Birth cohort studies are you recruit pregnant mothers when they're pregnant, and then you follow their children over time, and you study for various potential developmental effects, including IQ. And the NIH-funded studies on fluoride have consistently found that elevated prenatal exposure to fluoride, as measured in the urine of the mom, is associated with significant large reductions in IQ in the offspring. And these IQ tests start at age 4, and some of them have been done between ages 6 and 12. And at both age groups, the significant associations between the mother's fluoride exposure and IQ have been observed in these studies. And again, these are funded by the NIH, very rigorous studies. They control for basically every confounding factor possible. And, there's no dispute that these are high quality studies, none. I mean, they are high quality studies. And one other thing, these studies are not looking at massive doses of fluoride. They're looking at the same doses of fluoride that are added to water here in the United States. And so that's really the focus of our lawsuit is we now have data, high quality data funded by the NIH linking maternal exposure to fluoride with deficits in IQ.
So are you guys trying to get fluoride banned?
Absolutely. That was the genesis of this lawsuit because EPA has the authority under TSCA to ban fluoridation. And so what we are doing with this case before a federal court in Northern California is the court has one question before it. And that is, does fluoridation present an unreasonable risk of neurodevelopmental effects? That's the question.
Yeah.
And if the court rules that it does, then the EPA will be mandated by law to take action to address that risk. Now, to be clear, the judge can't tell EPA what to do, but it's pretty clear. If the risk is being caused by adding this substance to the water, how do you eliminate the risk?
Right. Yeah. Right. It seems like it would be an easy choice for a parent. Do you want your kid to be dumber or to have some tooth decay? Possibly, like stop feeding your kid sugar. How about that? Brush their teeth and keep them smart. Like it seems like the trade-off. I don't know of any parent that would say, nah, I'd rather prevent cavities and have a dumber kid. It just seems like, I don't know of anybody that would fight for that. So who's fighting for this? Like so you've got, well, let me just back up for a second. So you have these studies, you said that these studies were done in China in the 90s. Is that when they started studying this?
That's when they started studying them.
Why in the world would they wait that long? If they were adding fluoride in the water since 1945, why would they wait so long to even conduct these kinds of studies to say, I wonder what kind of effect this is having on people?
Well, that's a great question. And the reality is they had so little safety data on fluoride when they started adding it en masse to water. It was the better living through chemistry days when there was a lot of optimism about what chemicals can do in our lives and not a good appreciation for the potential unintended consequences. So, we were adding lead to gasoline, right?
Yeah.
Lead to gasoline and fluoride to water. Both of them are neurotoxicants. And, leaded gasoline is probably the biggest environmental health tragedy of the 20th century. It caused widespread harm, including significant neurodevelopmental harm. And I think you have an interesting parallel here with fluoridated water. Fluoride, the evidence is pretty clear that at least at certain doses, fluoride is a neurotoxicant. It will affect the brain. And, I think we really need to think long and hard about, do we want to be adding a neurotoxicant to our water supply? It's always difficult in science to get complete definitive answers on some of these questions because, you don't have a controlled laboratory experiment because, we're exposed to it every day. But, I think there's a certain point where we need to start taking some precautionary measures to cut down on the potential risk.
Well, yeah, and lead paint was banned, right? We don't have lead in we're not lacing everything with lead anymore, and we got rid of asbestos, for example, so why not, who fought against that, right? I'm sure there were plenty of people that were fighting against taking lead out or getting rid of asbestos. But it does seem kind of odd, right, that there would be proponents of adding these things into materials. So it's kind of the question of like, who's the group that benefits, I suppose. I could kind of understand it maybe but is there big fluoride? Is there like a big fluoride, are they making billions of dollars off of this? Like who's benefiting? Why not just remove it from the water?
When I think about the politics of fluoride, I do think of it in the early days and today. So I'll start with the early days where it's clear, we have more documentation. There was big fluoride in the early days. And just to give you an example, you're talking about lead. Who was behind adding lead to gasoline? Robert Cahoe and the Kettering Institute, which was a slush fund for every chemical polluting industry in this country. They gave money to the Kettering Institute, which then funded studies on health effects and, giving every one of these chemicals a clean bill of health. Well, Robert Cahoe not only promoted leaded gasoline, he also was a strong proponent of fluoridated water and did a lot of studies on fluoride on behalf of industry. They had a fluorine lawyers committee. Here's an interesting fact for you. Between 1950 and 1970, fluoride air pollution caused more liability for industry in this country than the top 20 air pollutants combined. Fluoride was an extremely litigious chemical because it caused clear and overt and provable harm to downwind communities in the form of crippled cattle. Cattle would basically become crippled and fall on their knees, their teeth would fall out, and vegetation would become scorched. And you could prove it was fluoride by just testing the vegetation for fluoride, and boom, there you go. So industry had a clear problem on its hand with fluoride pollution. And they, again, were funding a lot of the research that has been used to influence safety standards on fluoride that affect us all, right?
But it's one thing to say, now this is fine, it's safe, don't worry about it. It's another thing to go a step further and say, and then we're going to add it to all the water. Like that's another layer of insane.
The why question is really interesting and it's challenging. And I don't pretend to know all the answers for the why. Why was that decision ultimately made to add fluoride to water? It's one thing to say that the industry corrupted the science. And Kim, I've looked at a lot of documents on this in National Archives, Kettering Institute archives, a lot of documents. And I have found repeated instances of industry suppressing adverse data on fluoride toxicity. It's clear and it's a fascinating story. There's no question that industry corrupted science on fluoride. But that's still a separate question than what you're asking, which is, well, why do we add it to water? Because that's a different matter, right? And so I think one sort of thought experiment I've kind of worked through in my mind, and is if industry like the aluminum industry did not have these pollution problems with fluoride in the 30s and 40s, would we have ever fluoridated the water? And I think that's an interesting. I tend to think, based on everything I've seen, that no, that idea wouldn't have gotten to the front of the line. Okay. And because the aluminum industry in the 1930s really started to sort of promote this idea that fluoride could be good for teeth. And then it kind of took on a life of its own.
Mm.
So the aluminum industry plays a very important role here, but you don't have the documents to spell it all out, right? Like it's not like you can prove it, right? You can say like absolutely we know, right? But there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot
Mhm.
of there's a really interesting politics, but it's at this point in time. I like to say we need more historians to go back and really do a deep dive and really try to better understand what happened.
Yeah. But it sounds like what you're saying, just from piecing it together, is just that there was industry that wanted to prove that fluoride wasn't harmful because they were using it. What were they using? What was it found in?
So the aluminum industry uses fluoride as a flux. And what that means is it allows them to reduce the melting point for aluminum, which saves them a ton of money because they
Okay.
don't have to use as much energy. But the result is they were emitting massive quantities of fluoride straight into the air, no pollution control technology available back then. And so it was causing real clear pollution problems for those
Okay.
communities.
So I could see where there would be a push by those certain industries that wanted to say, no, no, it's totally safe. See, we've got these studies, and the studies say it's not only safe, but look, it's kind of beneficial. And then it sounds to me like what you're saying is then it took a life on its own of its own when others then said, "Oh, what? It's beneficial." Like, wow, well then why not, if it's such a beneficial element, why don't we just add this to water in order to prevent tooth decay? So it kind of it's what started off as an industry just trying to say, "Don't look over here, don't try to regulate us, leave us alone. We're going to continue doing what we're doing. We're not doing anything harmful." Then another group of people said, "Oh, well, there's this substance that's good and because it'll do this XYZ thing, so why not?" Right? It wasn't like they had a monetary reason, but maybe one group had a monetary reason, but then another group was just kind of the do-gooders that felt like they were helping society and children and parents.
Well, and I think that's a good point. I certainly don't want to dispute that there was a lot of good intentions at play. I mean, there was a lot of
Yeah.
dentists who were seeing firsthand real problems with cavities. A lot of guys couldn't even go into the army because they had their teeth were so bad, right? So there was no question that there's a lot of good intentions, like a desire to find a way to treat this problem. That was there. That was a part of it. You can't erase that from the history, right?
Sure.
But then there's other influences, and like the aluminum industry, the sugar industry, right? The sugar industry is looking at the news coming in that fluoride's good, could reduce cavities, and boom, they're on it too, right?
Mhm.
Organized dentistry, they see that fluoride could be good for teeth, they're on it too. So you kind of
Mhm.
have like people, different groups piling on. Uh,
Right.
but here's one, I think clean historic example for you that kind of speaks to the aluminum industry's influence and the sugar industry's influence. The first person to ever propose adding fluoride to water is Gerald Cox, who worked for the Mellon Institute, and he was funded by both the aluminum industry and the sugar industry. And Cox in 1939 said, quote, the present trend towards the complete removal of fluoride from water may need some reversal, unquote. So the present trend towards taking the stuff out of the water to protect public health may actually need to be flipped. And we may need to add it to water because it's so good for our teeth. So, that I think is an interesting and important data point when you're looking at the history of fluoride.
Yeah. Okay, so look, we can forgive the people in the past. I suppose they had a lot of really wacky ideas, and we've done a lot of correcting. But here we are in the future now. Here we are, and now they've started to do actual studies on fluoride. And what have they? And you said that they found that it affects the brain. That kids. So there was the Chinese study that was kind of like you said, not the best study, but there's since been other studies. Have those studies been do they all show the same thing? Is there some debate on the studies? Like, do some studies say, "No, there's no issue here?"
Yes, I mean, in science, you're always going to have some contradictory findings. That's to be expected. But what is striking about the fluoride research on the brain is the National Toxicology Program, the NTP, which are the subject matter experts on toxicology issues at the federal government. okay? They have been working for the past 7 years, on a systematic review of all of the literature on fluoride in the brain. And they had completed what their scientists considered to be the final and complete review in May of 2022. And but they were not allowed to publish it, which is another story which we can talk about. But that report has now been released thanks in part to our litigation. So we have that draft report, and it concludes that the evidence on fluoride NIQ is a large database. There's 72 studies on fluoride NIQ in human populations as of 2022. 72 studies, that's a lot. 64 of those studies had found an association between fluoride and reduced IQ. NTP considered that a very consistent body of evidence. NTP concluded that confounding and other biases are unlikely to explain that consistent association. So the NTP's report was highly significant. And, from a public health standpoint, I mean, here you have a federal government body, right, saying, hey, we have a real potential problem on our hands. And Kim, they were not allowed to publish that report.
Why? Who stopped it?
The Assistant Secretary of Health at the HHS, Rachel Levine, who was pressured by dental officials at the CDC Division of Oral Health and the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research, which is NIDCR, as well as the Chief Dental Officer. So a bunch of the dental people within Health and Human Services really kind of pushed on Levine, and Levine responded by instructing the NTP to not publish the report, to put it on hold, to allow for further review.
Why? I mean, why? It just seems so bizarre to me. Is big fluoride still around? Who's making all the money off of this? If you get these studies and it says it's not really good for you anymore, it seems to me that it would be a cost savings for the government to say, well, then let's just not add this crap into the water anymore. Then we don't have to buy it. We don't have, or are they buying it? Are they mining? Like, where are they getting it? Right. So there's an industry there perhaps that's wanting to make money, and, kind of what's happening here?
Right. So a couple points. First is, Kim, I would say, I have a lot of confidence when it comes to understanding what happened in the early days of fluoride. We've talked about it already. I have to say that it's not clear to me what the politics are today. I would say clearly, when you're dealing with medical dogma, I think fluoridation is a medical dogma. You have people who have, they've grown up with this, they've learned this, and it's hard. Paradigms die hard, right? Yeah. Scientific paradigms die hard. That's an important piece here to keep in mind, right?
So they're just stubborn. They're just like, I don't want to believe. I just don't want to believe. I just don't want to believe that it's bad. Okay.
I think that's absolutely an important part. You have institutional credibility and inertia, right? Like, you have organizations that have promoted this so aggressively in such absolute terms, right? Like, completely safe, completely effective. And it's hard to change course. You're inclined to not believe the red flags that are coming out, right? You have that. Okay? But, in terms of like what might be some of the special interest at play today, right? Well, I think the sugar industry is always there. I mean, you got to always keep in mind the sugar industry, okay?
I mean, I think the first question I would ask is, where are they getting the fluoride? Are they buying it from someplace? Because then that person, whatever that industry would be like, well, we don't want you to stop buying from us. 70% of the country is getting it.
Well, you know where the fluoride comes from?
I don't.
It comes from air pollution control scrubbers. And actually, the phosphate fertilizer industry in Central Florida, which is a notoriously dirty industry, okay? They had a massive fluoride pollution problem in the 50s, okay? Crippled cattle, scorched vegetation, lots of liability. They then put on air pollution control scrubbers on their smokestacks, which trapped the fluoride, created a sort of fluoride acidic liquor called hydrofluorosilicic acid. That's what it's called. That's barreled up and shipped around the country and metered into our water supply.
No, this sounds horrifying. No.
That's the primary, that is the overwhelming majority of fluoridation chemicals that were used in this country came from the fertilizer industry in Central Florida. Now, things have started to change in the past 15 years because now we're getting more of the fluoride from China. And I haven't actually looked that much in to see like what industries and where it's coming from in China, but we're getting more and more of it from China and less of it from our domestic phosphate industry.
Oh, well,
So
so then China's pushing it on us saying like, "You guys be dumb. How about you guys just turn into idiots?" Yeah, and less competition. I mean, that should be right there, a reason for many people to wanna stop buying fluoride. The fact that I mean, I just don't know what idiot, honestly, it just seems like just sheer stupidity. Like, maybe that person was drinking a lot of fluoride and messed with their own brain. But it's like, who thinks like, "Oh, we took this pollutant out of the air because it's bad in the air, and, oh, let's bottle that up and stick it in the water instead." Like, what idiot thought that was a good idea?
well, I mean, you have literally there's a letter from the EPA in the 1980s saying that fluoridation provides an ideal way of dealing with this air pollution problem from the phosphate industry because you're taking what would be an air pollutant and you're turning it into this beneficial product that goes into our drinking water. So that's been sort of the approach. And there's this like there's this sort of concept of the solution to pollution is dilution. The
I mean,
solution to pollution is dilution. So you take this concentrated pollution and you put it in lower concentrations in all of our water supply. It's no longer pollution. It's a benefit for you and me.
I guess I could suppose that there's some chemicals out there that in small doses are fine. Of course, in high doses they're toxic. So maybe, but it just seems like sheer stupidity to think, oh, let's purify it from the air because it's bad and it's causing teeth to cows, ironically, for their teeth to fall out, and for them to become crippled, and let's throw it in the water for all these humans. I mean, it just seems like a really bad idea from the get go. But nonetheless, so it just seems to me like the hunkering down and the pushback of no, we don't want to get rid of fluoride in the water. From what I understand, fluoride, you don't need to consume fluoride in order to get the benefits of the tooth to prevent teeth decay, right? Like, don't you just need to like use mouthwash?
That's a really important point, and I think people really need to appreciate that. And that is, when we started fluoridating in the 40s and 50s, the belief is that you need to swallow it when your teeth are developing. That's why you added to water. That's why you added it to pills. But the consensus, the overwhelming consensus in the dental research community, okay, the CDC and others, is that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical, not systemic. You can brush it on your teeth and spit it out. You don't need to swallow it. And so I think that is such a fundamental discovery and point that like really should, bring about a rethink of how we handle fluoride. Like if you don't need to swallow it, don't add it to 200 million people's water supply.
Right.
Because you can debate the science. You can say, it's not enough proof for me. I'm not convinced. We need more studies to prove that this is harmful. You can do those, but like, why even take the risk? Like, why keep going when you don't even need to swallow it? Like, just get it on your teeth with toothpaste and spit it out, and we're not going to have a problem. I mean, there's
Yeah.
still some risk with toothpaste, but like not nearly as much as adding it to everyone's water.
Yeah. I'm just looking this up. I don't know if I drank fluoridated water as a kid.
Where'd you
This
go?
Idaho. I grew up in Idaho.
Maybe not. Actually, Idaho's a low. You might have been on a well.
I wasn't on a well system. I had family members who were, but my home was not on a well. But it says right here that few public water systems in Idaho add fluoride to the drinking water.
That's
I'm
right.
saying that because I remember as a kid going to the dentist, and the dentist would have me mouthwash with the fluoride.
Mhm.
And that was like the common thing. We'd go every 6 months and they would make sure that we did 30 seconds with the fluoride mouthwash because it was going to help with the cavity, prevent cavities. And I've never had a cavity in my entire life.
Mhm. Did you ever
So,
did you ever have any kind of symptoms like a nausea or anything when you had the fluoride treatments?
not that I remember. Not that I remember, but um, so I'm curious, like which areas. Yeah, so maybe I didn't drink fluoridated water. Thank goodness. I mean, how would a person now avoid it? I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but because I want to get back to I have some other questions. But can you purify this out? Like if you use a Brita filter, or how can we not drink this?
Brita filters do not remove fluoride.
Okay.
Pure filters do not remove fluoride. Those are both activated carbon. Those don't work. To remove fluoride, you need to use reverse osmosis, which is a more expensive type of filter, or you can use some, ion exchange. I mean, it requires a more complex filter to remove fluoride. So your everyday,
Okay.
pure and Britas do not.
Okay. I know there's one called Zero Water. Maybe that one works or something. You have to research it and see like which filtration systems actually remove fluoride. Because I don't want to drink this stuff anymore. I mean, I don't want to drink this. And I'm living in LA, so I'm probably drinking this.
Oh, you're drinking it, right? I mean, my preference is to get spring water. Just get spring water.
Well, right. Like get a water delivery service type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those don't have fluoride in them.
You almost always they have very low levels, but you should check with whatever company you're going with, and they will know the fluoride level. Just call them up; they'll tell you what it is, and you really want it 0.2 or below. So 0.2 or below is
Okay.
what you want.
The pushback on this just seems so odd. If a community, so do governments have to purchase this? So if they're buying it from China, then they're having to pay for it, right? So why not just eliminate this? Why not just eliminate the cost? Tell everybody to start mouthwash. It seems like one of the biggest proponents you could get on your side is like Crest, right? Like say, hey, add this into the mouthwash and start pushing it. Tell people that what they need is they just need mouthwash and they're not going to get their cavities, right? You just add it into the mouthwash and it's fine rather than, because we're removing it out of the drinking water. I mean, what is the holdup with them? If the overwhelming science is you just need to mouthwash with this, it just needs to be topical. If a lot of the science, even if it's a small amount of the science,
Yeah.
but any science that shows that this is harmful to your brain or to the developing brain of your child seems like a no-brainer to then say we shouldn't be adding this anymore. Let's just not
Right.
do this.
And I should be, to be fair to the Centers for Disease Control, Oral Health Division, and proponents of fluoridation, which I feel I should be, okay, they would say, well, yes, fluoride's benefit is predominantly topical, but guess what? The water is a great way of delivering topical fluoride. You're bathing your teeth in topical fluoride every day. That's their current position, okay? But it still begs the question, even if, and the science on this is extremely weak on their end for benefits of fluoridation now, but even if there was a slight topical benefit from fluoridated water, the fact remains you don't need to put it in your water to get that topical benefit. So it still doesn't justify, from my vantage point, adding it to an uncontrolled. Basically, you're adding it not only to your water, but all processed foods and beverages made with the water. We have an overexposure problem with fluoride today. And interestingly, Kim, you can see the overexposure problem. Do you know how?
How?
On kids' teeth. Because fluoride, when you ingest too much of it growing up, it creates a condition called dental fluorosis, which manifests in typically white streaks or splotches on the teeth. And that is caused by fluoride interfering with the tooth forming cells. And in its more severe conditions, it turns yellow, brown, and sometimes black. And so it can be a disfiguring condition, but most kids have it in its milder stages. But any dental fluorosis is a visible sign of overexposure.
So this is like the white splotchy teeth.
Yes.
I've seen this before, not on myself, but I've seen this on others. And it's because they drank fluoride as kids. And this is something so you'd have to have that at a young age. Like I wouldn't get it now drinking fluoridated water as an adult.
That's correct. And the classic sign of fluorosis, when you know it's fluorosis, front to upper teeth, okay? And you see the snow capping on the teeth. That is classic fluorosis, okay? And one of the major predictors and causes of fluorosis on the permanent upper front teeth, okay, is bottle feeding. giving babies formula that's made up with fluoridated water. And that's one of the most susceptible populations to fluoride toxicity in our country is formula-fed babies, because they are getting such a large dose by body weight. They have
Yeah.
the largest dose by body weight of all age groups in the population if you give them formula made with fluoridated water. And it's manifested in part by dental fluorosis.
Makes sense. It's the only thing they eat,
Mhm.
right? Little babies, the only thing they eat is well, they drink. That's it. That's the only thing they do. They don't eat. And if you're giving them formula, so if they're not breastfed at all, and then you have to mix it with water. And so they're getting a higher consumption rate of that water than anybody else
And
per body weight.
here's an interesting fact for you. When you formula feed a baby with fluoridated water, you flip nature on its head in the sense that breast milk contains extremely low levels of fluoride. Now, typically with breast milk, it's going to give you all the stuff you need, right?
Right.
So fluoride's absence from breast milk is notable, right? Like nature is actually kind of keeping fluoride away from the newborn baby. So a breastfed infant receives the lowest dose of fluoride of all age groups in the population by far. But when you formula feed them with fluoridated water, they become the highest exposed age group in the population.
Oh, interesting. So it doesn't transfer. So if the mother is drinking a lot of fluoridated water, she's living here in LA, just gulping that stuff, it doesn't make it into the breast milk.
There's a plasma breast milk barrier with fluoride where it's basically it reduces it substantially. So even if you're drinking high levels of fluoride, it's still going to be low levels in your breast milk.
Isn't that telling right there that the body doesn't want it to be passed on to an infant? If the body is preventing it from getting it through, then shouldn't that say something to these people that want to continue fluoridating the water?
I think it certainly speaks to this is not something you need to swallow. It's not something that's essential. And at best, it's a medication that could be beneficial therapeutically, but do you want the water supply to be your source for delivering it?
Right. And I think there seems to be a lot writing on this case, but I know with cases, I always get so frustrated because they're often, like with the mandate, for example, when the vaccine mandates were reversed, when many of them were reversed, it was on a technicality of some kind, or it wasn't on the merits of the actual, because this is unconstitutional to do to people. It was based on oh, well, it wasn't, fair. You only made some people do it, not, something like that. In this case, I mean, if you win, which I hope you do, because whether even if fluoride is perfectly safe, like if they want to push that and believe that, I just don't want them medicating my water. That's what. It doesn't matter what the medication is. I don't care how beneficial it is for me. Do not medicate my water.
Mhm.
I will take a medication if I want to take a medication. Stay out of it. Even if you think, oh, it's for your own good, I don't care. It's not your business, right? That's my business. So if you win, will it set that precedent as well? Or is this just on the merit of, but fluoride is not good, so don't do fluoride?
Well, if the court rules that there's an unreasonable risk, then the EPA has to eliminate that risk. They have to
fluoride. But
fluoride.
This isn't
right. Oh, I see. I mean, in terms of the larger question about using water supply for medication. No, this case would not speak to that issue. I would say, though, Kim, one thing to note is that the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is a federal statute enforced by the EPA, has a provision in it that specifically prohibits the EPA from requiring the addition of medicine to the water supply. Okay, so we should keep that in mind. That is in the
why doesn't that apply to fluoride?
Because it's not the federal government that's doing it. The EPA can't do it, but local health boards can do it. State governments can do it, but the EPA can't.
What a loophole.
Yeah.
I mean, how is that even possible? I mean, if there seems to be so there's a federal law that says you cannot add, but then the localities are allowed to?
Yes.
So I can be poisoned by my mayor. I just can't be poisoned by my president.
The mayor has the right to do that. And but the federal government doesn't mandate fluoridation, but the reality is they are the biggest pushers of it, right? Like the CDC spends millions of dollars each year promoting fluoridation. They pay private organizations to go out and promote fluoridation, right? So like the federal government isn't requiring you to drink fluoride in your water, but they're doing everything possible to encourage your state and your local health bodies to order that you do.
I just don't understand how there could be a federal, what is it called? The Safe
Safe
Drinking.
Drinking Water Act.
How does that not apply to every other level of government?
Because it's just a limitation on the EPA's power. It's not a limitation on the power of local government, state government.
Seems like then everybody would want to adopt that. Just, oh man, there's so many layers that we have to think about. It's just like this to protect ourselves from really government overreach in a lot of ways and to protect our health. It just feels like, yeah, you could get something like the mandates, for example, on the federal level. You could maybe get them to reverse them for federal employees, but you can't. But then you'd have to do it on every level of government below that.
Right.
So you have to keep pushing. Then it's got to happen. It just seems like so much work to have to get this at every single layer. I mean, I'm big on the federation. I think it's great that we have individuals and state rights. But at the same time, when it comes to this type of thing, then it's like, oh man, we just won one battle at one level, but then we got to win it at another level. But if you win at this level, this means everybody, or what? What does that mean? Can a municipality still go ahead and fluoridate?
No, if we win and the EPA does what logic would seem to dictate, namely, if their obligation is to eliminate the risk posed by fluoridation chemicals, then the obvious way of doing that is to ban this practice. If EPA makes that decision, okay, then no municipality, even if it wants to, can fluoridate its water because EPA is the highest, would be the highest authority on that issue. So that's the potential that we have right now. A favorable court decision triggers a rulemaking proceeding by EPA, and if EPA at the end of that rulemaking proceeding decides to ban fluoridation, every community in this country will stop adding this to water overnight.
Why can't they do that for everything then? If they have the Safe Drinking Water Act, why can't they say you can't add anything to water? We're banning it.
Well, I think that goes back to we do need to add some stuff to the water. Okay, like chlorine is the biggest example, or chlorine. You need to deal with the bacteria so that people aren't getting sick. But I certainly think, and we've talked about this, that fluoride does not need to be because it doesn't treat the water.
Well, right. I mean, why can't they just ban anything that isn't directly treating the water, like any other additive that people just, if these governments are like, oh, I got a bright idea, I heard about this and it's going to cure cancer. Like, let's try it on our people.
Right.
And then lo and behold, we find out that it actually causes rampant cancer, right? 10 years down the line, that type of thing, just some kind of protection. But, well, interesting. I mean, is there anything that we're missing here? I think this was a great conversation. I really learned a lot. I know that hopefully everybody watching also learned a lot. I certainly don't want to drink fluoride anymore. I'm going to have to start really looking into this. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I'm so ignorant on this topic. I really thought that fluoride had been banned long ago. I mean, I assumed that they weren't doing this because it seems odd.
I would just add, Kim, because we know we've been speaking a lot about the brain, which is where a lot of the focus in the research is, but I would just say that there are a couple of other really key health concerns with fluoride today, one of which is bone fractures, particularly hip fractures. Fluoride, we know fluoride, there's no dispute that fluoride weakens bone, period. It's proven, no dispute. The question is the dose, but there are high quality studies, including one from Sweden 2 years ago, that found that optimal levels of fluoride in the water increase the rate of hip fracture in postmenopausal women. So that's one significant concern.
Well, and that kills. I mean, if you break your hip and at a certain age, you're going to die. I mean, there's like a big chance.
So that's one big concern. Another big concern is thyroid disease. Fluoride, we think about fluoride as a drug for cavities and teeth. Mm-hmm. Fluoride was once used as a drug to reduce thyroid function.
Hmm.
If you had hyperthyroidism, overactive thyroid, fluoride was used to bring it down. And that the concern today is that fluoride may be contributing to hypothyroidism, underactive thyroid, which is a real problem today in the United States. A lot of women particularly have it. So there's a thyroid concern. So it's not, just want to say, it's not just the effects on the brain. That's the focus of our case. There's,
Sure.
and one other effect is arthritis. Osteoarthritis is a big, we know that fluoride can cause osteoarthritis. We know that for a fact. No dispute about it. The question is the dose, and there is good evidence to indicate that Americans are getting enough fluoride to cause arthritis.
And this is, you would have to consume it at any age in order to have those effects?
Yes, that's not limited to being a kid.
Well, I don't want arthritis and I don't want to break my hip. Nor do I want hypothyroidism. Is that what makes you fatter? Which one is it that makes you fatter? Hypo or
Hypothyroidism.
hyper? Hypo?
Hypothyroidism. The other thing is, if you know anyone with kidney disease, okay,
Uh-huh.
especially someone with dialysis, okay, they do not want to be drinking fluoridated water. That's the one population. If I had the ability to specifically notify and alert one population, well, formula-fed babies, pregnant mothers, okay, and people with kidney disease. Because if you have kidney disease, you have a very impaired ability to excrete this stuff from your body, and it builds up. And, one of the things, because of the suppression of science in the early days, one of the things I spent a lot of time reading about this, and it was really bothered me a lot. But in the 1970s, it came to light that dialysis patients were suffering this crippling bone disease called osteomalacia, fluoride-induced osteomalacia. It's a softening of the bone, very painful disease, because the dialysis centers were not removing fluoridated water at the time, and they were being poisoned with fluoride, these dialysis patients. Now they stopped. The dialysis centers now remove a fluoride from the dialysate, okay? But if you're drinking fluoridated water, and you're someone with advanced kidney disease, you're an at-risk population. So
Yeah.
if you have family members with kidney disease, I would suggest spring water, bottled water, non-fluoridated water. That's a major at-risk population for fluoride, and the government has completely abandoned them. No one from the government ever, despite knowing they're at risk, no one has done anything to educate, notify, or alert that very vulnerable population. No one, nothing. They've just been left on their own. And that's just something, Kim, that I spent a lot of time reading about that. It's very bothering to me. The government's adding this to the water. There should be an obligation to notify people who are at risk, pregnant mothers, bottle-fed babies, kidney patients, and there's no effort to do that. None. People are left to fend for themselves. No information on that from government health bodies.
And all to prevent tooth decay. That's it's one thing if it was like something really debilitating, terrible cancer or whatever it is, right? But it's just tooth decay. It's so bizarre. I hope you win. Good luck to you. When will you get a ruling back, do you think? So how long is the trial? What do you expect?
The trial is 2 weeks. It starts tomorrow, January 31st. And people, if they want to watch it, it's going to be live streamed through the court's website. So if you go to the Northern District of California, you should be able to watch the Zoom proceeding live. But it goes for 2 weeks. And then I don't know when the court's going to issue its decision, but I would think within approximately a month, but you never can sort of tell. But I would say within that time frame.
Wow. Well, good luck to you. I'll definitely have the link to the live stream down below so that people can check that out. And then, we'll just keep we'll keep watching with bated breath on whether or not, when that ruling comes out, and hopefully it's in your favor. You feel confident? You feel good?
I think we're in a very good position. I think we're in a very good position.
All right. Well, good luck to you. Thank you so much for joining us and educating us on this. I had no idea. This was very eye-opening for me. I was going to go get a drink of water after this, but now a little bit, I don't know what to do. I'm going to have to go and, I try not to drink bottled water because of all the, there's so many plastic bottles. I try not to do that. So I might have to look into ordering some spring water and having
You
that set up somewhere.
you can get 5-gallon jugs of glass bottles, so you don't having plastic, and that's the best because you don't have like BPBA or whatever.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I'll have to. Now I'm going to have to research this. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Best of luck. Go get them.
Thank you, Kim. It's great being on.
Thank you. All right, guys, that is it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back again with another great show, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern is what we're kind of shifting the show time to. So we kind of played around with it last week at 11 a.m. Pacific, but we're going to do noon. So 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We will be back. Another great show. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, comments, if you want to suggest guests for the show or topics, I love hearing from you. Kim@KimIverson.com. All right, guys. See you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.